on the train the other day and thought of this backyard company I saw in the early years of YouTube. It wasn't 2KW, and I know that for a fact, not just because I helped produce the most recent iteration of 2KW about a decade ago, but it took place in what I believe to be Gerritsen Beach, Brooklyn. In a field, or like literally on a beach. No ring, no nothing, just a bunch of teenagers fake fighting on a beach. I hit up the ever mysterious Sin, the founder of 2KW, about the company while I was writing this opening, because I needed permission to use the footage you're seeing in the video version of this show, and I also wanted to get the name of that backyard fed, because it was driving me nuts. I needed to know what it was, and it was XBW, by the way. It was XBW, which one would think is to mean Extreme Backyard Wrestling. As I sat there writing this intro on Valentine's Day, I was wondering if 2KW was as influential as aspects of the story we're telling in this season of Historically Speaking. While the direct impact of our key players in the story may outweigh the direct impact of a ragtag group of young adults to insanely unsupervised children, it still produced two guys who'd become one of the best tag teams of the last 20 years, a direct influence on the distribution of pro wrestling on digital platforms like YouTube and leveraging that to get to the point of running their own shows in a venue with a ring and not on a Harlem playground. And also a direct influence on wrestlers like Will Ospreay. Not only how to essentially build your own ball field and do no-ring wrestling, but also the completely batshit things guys like the Walking Riot Rays was doing on a playground in Harlem. If you're watching the video version, yeah, that was on a playground that Robert Moses had built before TVs had color. Much like 90% of the stories we tell on this show, the reason why something like 2KW existed was due to the politics surrounding New York wrestling. Is following the downfall of kayfabe and the reorganization of the New York State Athletic Commission, running pro wrestling events with a ring was a measure that came with things promoters hate more than a talent who know their own value: paperwork and paying for things. Another promoter was tired of perceived governmental overreach and paying to an organization that didn't prioritize his interest, was in the midst of a change 50 years before wrestlers like Drama Seidel and Chris Cage looked to careen one another from slide to mat and back again. As Pedro Martinez had absconded from the NWA and tried his hand at being an agitator to Capital Wrestling at any stage he could, along with turning Western New York into his own personal wrestling playground. Historically Speaking, I'm Matt Ryan, and this is the secret wrestling history of how Pedro Martinez and Johnny Powers tried to take over pro wrestling, at least twice. With Pennsylvania and the Triple WF in his rearview mirror, Johnny Powers would make his own way back north and run his own version of a loop between the Midwest, Toronto, and Buffalo, each helping educate the barely over 21 savant, molded in the image of Buddy Rogers with eyes above his station. Fellow former Northeast Peroxide protagonist Eddie Graham acted as the model for how a wrestler would handle the more modern dual-purpose role as both wrestler and promoter. While it wasn't an invention of the space age, more often promoters were less the top talent of a territory, but instead of someone like Mont, who could hold his own in the ring but wouldn't be the world champion. Powers would look to Martinez as a real mentor, as the fellow wrestler turned promoter, as referenced ad nauseum in the first few episodes of this series, had been one of the most important promoters the business had seen to that point. Looking to no longer be under the boot heel of promoters, the Canadian wunderkind soon would go from the middle and or top heel / spot show promoter to top guy and full partner with a promoter who worked with and seemingly hated everyone. And while Martinez was not keen on the NWA back in 1967, Martinez was back in the alliance, and much like the elder promoter had done the decade prior, Powers wanted to control his own destiny and tell the NWA to go fuck itself. Running into money troubles, Martinez had in 67, where he'd faced bankruptcy, and in 1970, the city of Buffalo would table a request from his Erie Wrestling Club for a moratorium on its office rent and a forgiveness to its debts to the Buffalo Memorial Auditorium. Martinez would end up selling to his top star. Powers set up what modern fans would know as the Vince Jr. deal, where Powers essentially paid a big down payment for the business and would make payments utilizing the gate receipts until the deal was satisfied. But if it wasn't satisfied, or if he missed payments, the company would revert back to Martinez. Unlike McMahon the Younger, Powers would not be able to lock in that deal, which would see Martinez regain the business, but cut Powers in as a 50-50 partner, as both would look to continue carving out their place at the table of pro wrestling. Up until internet message boards and newsletters dominated the landscape as the 90s turned into the 2000s, wrestling magazines were the key to cultural cachet outside and inside a given territory, especially Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and the man who'd be the face of the magazine even past his time there, Bill Apter.
First of all, Bill Apter's a great guy. I love him. And him and I were kind of at the same late 20s, got together, him first as a writer and me as a newborn wrestling promoter of some consequence, a growing consequence. But Bill was always a straight-up guy. If he saw talent, and he saw good matches, and he saw good territories, he gave it appropriate billing. And we had unbelievable talent. I mean, we had first matches with Pedro Firpo and Abdul the Butcher, and when we had 6 or 7 or 8 matches, many of them, the preliminary matches, were main eventers in other territories.
As a new decade was dawning in pro wrestling, another 3 letters would enter the arms race in their own attempt to own pro wrestling in their corner of the world. In 1970, the two men, Martinez and Powers, would found the National Wrestling Federation, which is the modern equivalent of SEO fishing, as they took the first 2 words of the NWA and then just changed the organizing body from an alliance to the Federation.
So I sent to Pedro one time, and I'm about a year or so in the business. I said, Pedro, this championship from NWA is hurtful to us. So I said, well, do I have to put up with it? No. Well, what do I do? I guess you do whatever you want to do. What do you want to do? He'd give me a lot of lead. And I said, I think I want to create my own champion. I want to create my own federation. If I can't control it, maybe a bunch of us control it, but we'll have some new ideas, and we'll be able to get a champion as a main event more often.
And while the NWF would be an independent governing body, it would draw upon the talents of NWA United States champion The Sheik, as the Midwest would witness a burgeoning alliance between promotions the same way Doyle and Barnett or Kohler and McMahon would establish the decade prior. With a roster that featured a young Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch as the Texas Outlaws as early holders of their World Tag Team titles, a young Jimmy Boogie Woogie Man Valiant, The Sheik, Bulldog Brower, and a legend like Hans Schmidt from the original golden era of TV wrestling, on top of everybody from the Detroit promotion and Pittsburgh as time would go on. The NWF started off with some firepower of the past, present, and future of that time in the industry. With both Pedro and his son Ron disenchanted with promoting wrestling, Cleveland would eventually become Powers' main responsibility, despite it being the heart of the territory, as Martinez would prefer to stay in Buffalo, which he had developed as his home. We fast forward a little bit, as the NWF and Powers would look to build out not only into Western New York and portions of Canada, but locked in Cleveland as their home turf, filming championship wrestling with Johnny Powers in the city by the lake. That's right, Johnny Powers put his name on the TV. And this, by the way, predated his buying the damn territory. Like, this was a Martinez move.
Once again, to Heavyweight Championship Wrestling. Johnny Powers, myself on hand. Some great matches lined up. And it's kind of nice to be back with the wrestlers again. Although I don't know. I still haven't regained any courage over the summer months, John, at all.
I'm great. All the audience thinks so, too.
They think I'm
No, that's not true. And speaking about great wrestlers, the Love Brothers, the world.
Imagine if Raw with CM Punk, or Friday Night SmackDown with Cody Rhodes, or AEW Dynamite with Jon Moxley was a thing. Outside of Raw Championship Wrestling, which was hosted by and I think promoted by the legendary Ron Wright, I can't think of anybody who had their name on the TV. Maybe Jules Strongbow on the LA TV, but if you know about that, or if there are any other shows where the top guy or the promoter's name was in the title, maybe like Kazana in East Tennessee, let me know. Let me know right here in the comments, in the reviews on the audio version, or on YouTube. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you guys so much. But yeah, to go back to what we were talking about, It wasn't just those cities seeing Powers, as by 72, Martinez alongside Jerry Jacobs, who owned the most powerful concessions company in American sports at that time, bought Pittsburgh from Guido Mongol and Montreal from the Rougeaus. So we already see and have seen that Powers had a healthy ego. And in 1972, with all this going on, Powers had an idea so audacious, so absurd, I'm completely surprised no one else in wrestling has tried it in the last 53 years. Imagine, if you will, a baseball stadium. And then in said baseball stadium, you put a wrestling ring at home base. And then one at first base. And then one at third base. And then imagine wrestlers wrestling. Not just in one ring, not just in two rings, but in all three rings at the same time. And then came the fucking chariots.
First of all, I've always been a curious cat, and I love audiences, and I love entertaining audiences. I'm an Irish storyteller that likes to put bums in seats, and that's my big charge out of life. And so I went to a Ringling Brothers show, a circus, and all of a sudden, and usually they're boring, but in this case, there was three rings going at one time, and there was these unbelievable horses in one, and there was unbelievable acrobatic in another, and there was a great other troupe playing in another. And I'm going like, oh, look, this fascinates me. My head's swiveling here. Totally not boring. Totally very interesting. And the rest of, the circus lovers were there with it too. I said, why can't I do it in the wrestling business? So I will always, my question for me all the time is why? Why and why not? And why shouldn't I? And why shouldn't I try? And so I went back and I booked the Cleveland Stadium. And I got for $1,000. I bought the Chariots from the back lot of Paramount.
So, Johnny Powers, with $60,000 in ad money from Duke Beer, was about to throw the first Super Bowl of wrestling from Municipal Stadium in Cleveland. And Johnny Valentine would find himself back in our story, this time as the booker for Martinez and Powers, deciding to follow a trend similar to Valentine's booking mentor. That's right, you guessed it, George Scott. And the same methods that worked for Scott in the Carolinas, well, it was killing the territory up north because the slow and methodical style that Valentine had used, learning from Scott, was bringing down the houses in Buffalo, according to Ron Martinez, who passed that info along from the Wrestling Classics message board before he passed away. Valentine would also be the top heel who'd be headlining the stadium card with Powers, who obviously had experience with cards like this a few years prior when he was facing San Martino in Pittsburgh. Valentine and Powers would be the main attraction, but they would not be the only attraction, as Powers would set up 3 tag team tournaments. That's right, 3 tournaments! One for men, one for women, and one for those who today would be called little people. Add in the Chariots that Powers bought off the Paramount back lot, where I just imagine him and Robert Evans' collective egos being in the same space at the same time, possibly inverting the space-time continuum. But then you add in some horses, some dancing, and 3 wrestling matches going on at the same fucking time. It feels like the circus scene in Fear and Loathing in terms of the amount of sensory overload one person would be enduring while trying to follow all of this while in Section 320. Holy fuck. Valentine would incite the story that would bring us to the stadium by breaking Powers' nose in an attempt to make him not so pretty anymore, and or put him out of wrestling, as Ric Flair would do to Ricky Steamboat and Ricky Morton the years following this. This was to allegedly cover up that Powers wanted to get a nose job, and Valentine would help set up Powers needing a rhinoplasty by using his large fist to get the procedure started. Wrestling truly is the best and worst because of things like this. Along with the 3 tournaments and Powers and Valentine's grudge match for the NWF North American title, the NWA Women's World Champion Fabulous Moolah would defend the title, Bobo Brazil would face Killer Tim Brooks, the Fargos, one of which was a young Greg Valentine, would defend their NWF World Tag titles, and Abdullah the Butcher and Ernie Ladd's feud would see them in a brass knuckles match. Powers would put over $56,000 of his own money on top of that $60K in ad money into the show, not only for talent but the venue and billboard advertising to help generate interest in this huge risk. On a hot summer night on August 12, 1972, somewhere between 10 to 14, to Powers' claim of 20,000 humans would watch this literal spectacle outdrawing Cleveland's baseball team, who at the time were the opposite of good, featuring a 33-year-old Gaylord Perry and future Yankee icons Chris Chambliss and Greg Nettles. And also, by August, they were 7 games below 500, but would beat the Tigers 6-1 the same day as this Super Bowl of wrestling. With over $100,000 spent on the show, which in 2025 money is $756,359.52. Powers would feel a bit of that hit in 72, and by the time 1973 was turning into 1974, Powers had followed a similar path to Martinez in attempts to inflate his portfolio and had overextended himself with his finances as the man with his name on the TV was seeing houses diminish. Right around Christmas, it would be a conversation with himself that would set up the last gasp of the National Wrestling Federation nationally.
And so so one time, my house is down a little bit, and I look at myself, Powers, you're really stupid. Because an artist talks to himself a lot, as you know, right? You're stupid, Powers. What do you mean you're stupid? Look you're a white boy. Yeah. Look out there in the audience. It's 70% black. It's downtown Cleveland. The core of downtown Cleveland is 70%, maybe 90%. And your audience is 30% white and 20% black. And who are you going against? Ernie Ladd. What is he? A black man. So you got a black man as a heel, okay? You got a white boy as a babyface. Doesn't seem like logical. So I thought, I had an epiphany, as they say, right? Out of nervous tension from not wanting to lose too much more money. So I went by Ladd. I said, Ladd, I'm going to do a heel turn. Huh? And I said, Ox, you're going to do a run-in. Huh? And Powers is usually, and Ladd, who I ended up loving, was kind of a militant nature at that time. Cooperative, but not always cooperative. And Ox Baker is, you never know where Ox is at. And you still don't.
Just over a month after turning on the Big Cat, Powers would face Ladd in a match where if the former AFL star would be able to break Powers' version of the Figure 4 leg lock, the Powers lock, Ernie Ladd would get $5,000. But Powers would have an insurance policy in Ox Baker. But he'd also need one for the building as a full-blown fucking riot broke out. See, Ox Baker at this point was one of the most fearsome heels in pro wrestling, being the final opponent for 2 people who died of heart attacks after working with him, one of them being Ray Gunkel, whose death a few years prior instigated the pro wrestling war to end all pro wrestling wars in Atlanta. Baker utilized this to scare the living shit out of the general populace of the NWF's TV footprint, taking credit for the bodies. With that as a pretext, Baker jumped in the ring to help Powers lay a beatdown on Ladd. And well, Ernie Ladd may be 6'8", but that man could sell like Ricky Morton when he needed to. And a few months before 10-cent beer night would almost turn Cleveland Municipal Stadium into kindling, the people of Cleveland rioted inside the arena.
So I got in the ring, and I'm a baby face, and Ladd's a heel, but I reversed it inside, and I got him in a position where I turned on him, and Ox came in and helped me, and Ox kept doing heart punches on him. And he throws in a vicious, mean-looking, totally believable heart punch. And I leaned back, and I spit on him, and I called him not a friendly name in racial relationships world. Well, bam! You could just, and there was some tough guys. There was some guys that ran ladies at the front, at my ringside. And all of a sudden, it'd go flick, 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 and I'd see the switchblades come out. And I'm talking about 4 or 5 switchblades. Now, that's 4 or 5 too many, right? And I said, and all of a sudden, this chair comes, boom, and another chair comes, boom. And guys were running in the ring, and Lad's on the bottom. He's taking shares. I said, Ox, I think we should slow this down. No, one more punch. Oh, wow. Hits him another time. We ended up with the security guards, who we paid, left the building. They were so afraid. The riot police came after it was over. They were afraid to come in the building. This white boy was only saved partially because Bulldog Brower, who I kind of liked but didn't like, came down and threw a punch at me to take the heat off me that allowed me the opportunity to run like a scared bandit. And this white boy that doesn't jump and doesn't run much scaled, and you see me scaling over the hockey rink boards, and that, I don't think I got to do it again. Me screaming how they're going to do to all their body parts to the guys that are trying to get me. They went off. It was scary. We didn't tape that because we didn't think we were going to tape it. That was some fan up there that was taping. That's why it was bad quality. But Lad later on says, JP, I never heard somebody go off like that. And same with Ox. It was nervous.
That's right. Full-blown, we want to kill these guys riot. I love pro wrestling. By 1974, Martinez had sold out of the wrestling business once again, as San Martino would regain Pittsburgh, the Rougeaus would regain Montreal, while Buffalo and Cleveland would soon see the Sheik and/or the Triple WF, soon filling the void as Powers would plot his next act and take his NWF World title and his National Wrestling Federation branding to New Japan?
He says, NWA is charging me $40,000 for membership. Forget it, it's only $400 in Inoki. No, charging $40,000 US. Why? Because Baba is a member, and that's the other promotion over there, and his competitor, and they don't really want me in. I said, let me tell you something. I'm a little tired, and I got an idea for you. First of all, don't roll over for the old guys. Bullshit. Don't do it. You got too much pride, and you got too much talent. Secondly, you add some more zeros to that 40,000. I'll make you a world champion, and I'll sell you the National Wrestling Federation. You're kidding? You can do that? I said, I think so. Last time I looked, I owned it. And so I went in, and they brought Pat Patterson, goofy guy, great talent, but goofy guy, and made him a North American champion at that time because we were at the kind of the tail end of the run of NWF. And so it was Powers and Patterson against Inoki and Sakaguchi with Joe Louis as referee. What an unbelievable man. What another story. A great guy. Beat up by your goofy Internal Revenue Service in the government. And that got televised, I think, in Olympic Auditorium, went back into Japan. And then I went in in December 10th. You talk about seminal events. In a sold-out judo hall there. I had sold earlier in the day the National Wrestling Federation to New Japan Pro Wrestling, transferred from David Feldman, who flew over my president, to Sashi Shima as the new president of the National Wrestling Federation, and Antonio Inoki.
With Antonio Inoki craving a world title and the NWA staying loyal to member promoter Giant Baba's All Japan Pro Wrestling, less than 2 years into New Japan, Inoki and Powers would strike a deal that would bring the man, the belt, and the brand to help legitimize New Japan and Inoki, but also give Powers a new status as a global deal maker. Yeah, New Japan and All Japan are involved in this story too. Every promotion that's mattered in the last 50 years has been affected by the fate of this story. The key players in this story have somehow changed the shape of pro wrestling everywhere they've went. And like 5% of wrestling fans even know their stories even existed. Which is why we do this show. To tie all this bullshit together and try to create some sort of narrative that doesn't Jeremy Bearimy the fuck out of it. But lurking in the background is the man we talked about all the way in episode 1. And well, he was ready to make a play. Next week, how two men's love of basketball would set the stage for the next step of secret wrestling history, and the plot to steal Madison Square Garden away from Vince McMahon one more time. Historically Speaking is a production of the Intergalactic Sports Network and executive produced by Ember Media. Be sure to rate, review, like, subscribe, comment, and be sure to get your notifications set on whatever device and whatever platform you use as we continue to provide secret wrestling history and figure out how deep this rabbit hole goes. Until next week, bye!